Good afternoon, everybody. You're very welcome back after lunch, and I'm extremely impressed that you haven't stayed outside in the sunshine, so thank you so much for coming back in. Before I even introduce myself, because otherwise I'm terrified that I'm going to forget it, please remember the hashtag ChangeAcademy2016, which Ross kindly wrote down for me in case I got it wrong, but I wouldn't do something like that, Ross, as you well know. It's my very great pleasure to chair the politicians panel this afternoon and to introduce our politician speakers. My name is Ailbhe Smyth, and I am currently convener of the Coalition to Repeal the Eighth Amendment. And our three speakers for this afternoon, moving from Senator Eoin O'Riordan, Senator Lorraine Clifford-Lee, and Senator Pádraig McLaughlin. And it'll be my pleasure to introduce each of you individually before you speak. And what we've actually agreed is that after a short introduction, that each of our panellists will speak quite briefly on their party's general approach to the marriage equality, yes equality referendum, and also perhaps picking out learning for the future. And that they'll each keep it really quite brief inputs so that there'll be plenty of time for questions, discussion, observations, comments, and what have you. So just let me say that, I've been through a lot of referendums in my life in this country, and often we have a lot of referendums, and I think I've been through them all as far as I can tell. Twice around the block on divorce. We actually won the second time, but I think that was back in 1996, when I think we got something like 50.003% in favour. 3 times around the block on abortion. It got slightly easier. We lost less on the second 2 referendums, 1983, 1992, and 2002. And we are, of course, very much gearing up at the moment for a 4th referendum on abortion, which would be to repeal the Eighth Amendment from our Constitution. The Eighth Amendment prohibits women from accessing abortion services in this country unless their life is in danger. And more of that anon. I and 2 colleagues, Sinead and Gráinne, will be doing a workshop at 4:30. But one of the things that we wanted to try and do in this session is to perhaps pick out some of the learning from the Yes Equality campaign that can be helpful for what's called future campaigns. But in my book, that means the campaign to repeal the Eighth Amendment. I'm going to be absolutely upfront about that straight away. As you know, when I came out back in prehistory times, I never ever dreamed that I would be one day fighting and involved in winning a referendum on same-sex marriage. I never dreamed that that day would come. I mean, you couldn't even dream that far ahead. So it really has been a most extraordinary time for myself and all my friends and colleagues, all the people, so many of us here today, to actually think back on that and the degree of emotion, certainly that I felt on the day of the count, was absolutely extraordinary. And yet I would be kind of past marriageable sell-by date, if you see what I mean. But that was not the point. That was absolutely not the point, because this referendum said so much about what we understand equality to mean and what we really understand this country and its values and its politics to be about. We did, of course, have an enormous challenge. That challenge is, in a way, very, very simply put. To my mind, it was a challenge to convince the people of Ireland that lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender people are just that, people. Just people. People like other people, in all our complexity, in all our variety, in all our diversity, in all our complicatedness. And that as people, we are just as fully and just as equally entitled to the rights that other people take for granted. In this case, it was marriage. It was, and it can be, and it will be in the future, so many other things for so many people too. But to do that, we had to, of course, overcome deeply embedded homophobia throughout our society, and that, as we've heard in panels yesterday and today, was something that came up to the surface. And with the expression of it, that homophobia began to dissipate and to be dissipated. Once it's spoken out, you can begin, as Talia said this morning, to actually break down the fears and the ambivalences that people have. So what I want to do, and I meant to say that homophobia really embedded in our institutions, not the least of which was a historically authoritarian and highly traditional Catholic Church with a very strong hold on key institutions such as education. And I think that the results actually have revealed some very interesting things. And I'm just going to speak very briefly about what we learned, but actually it's more personal. What I think I learned as a long-time campaigner and activist from the Yes Equality campaign. And it's not that these things can be applied absolutely to another campaign. What I've tried to do is look at principles, because different issues require different tactics, but a different language, different vocabulary, different kind of territory, different sorts of negotiations. But the backbone principles of campaigning, which stood out very clearly in the Yes Equality campaign, I think they are backbone principles for any good referendum campaign, certainly in this country. Of course, that's all very well to say and to see so clearly with hindsight, but I have to say, and I don't think that Gráinne or Brian or any of the wonderful team involved in the Yes Equality campaign will mind if I say that we see very clearly with hindsight what we didn't always see absolutely clearly at the time, what often took a lot of discussion and a lot of hard work. So I just have a 10-point principle. They're really, really quick. A lot of them you've heard a lot of before. First of all, there is the belief that you absolutely must have going into any campaign, that you can win. It's not the same as saying that you necessarily will win, but you have to absolutely have that passion, have that knowledge inside yourself that you absolutely can win this, and to stay steadfastly focused at all times on that goal. Your goal is always to win that referendum. No internecine or domestic arguments or distractions or going off on woolly paths. Your goal is to win, to get people over the line in this particular referendum and to do what it takes to do that. And that is certainly something that I learned from the very beginning. It was Noel Whelan who actually said at the beginning, you are not there to win an argument, you are there to win a referendum campaign. And believe me, it is different. Secondly, that the more tightly organised, disciplined and strategic the campaign, the more effective it will be. That seems so obvious, but actually doing that structuring, keeping that tight discipline and control is hugely difficult. You have to know your issue inside out. You have to know your terrain inside out. You have to know your opposition inside out. And you have to build a great but tight team. Thirdly, you have to convince a whole electorate, the people of Ireland or the people of wherever it is, in all of their variety and complexity. It is not about talking among ourselves. It is about talking to people and with people that we don't normally talk to. And that's one of the reasons why the emphasis on conversation, citizen-led conversations, the wonderful campaign at the beginning that Gráinne really initiated, I'm voting yes, ask me why. That emphasis on talking with people that you wouldn't necessarily normally be in conversation with about these socio-sexual matters was really key to winning the campaign. Fourthly, developing voter awareness, and actually those conversations were very important in developing voter awareness, but there was a key component at the beginning of the campaign, or technically before it started, which was the Citizens' Convention, which was set up by government. And it was an exercise in deliberative democracy. You probably heard something about it yesterday. And I believe that it worked far more effectively than our Taoiseach Enda Kenny actually ever thought it would. And what happened was that the huge vote in favour of marriage equality within the Citizens' Convention put pressure on the Taoiseach and the Fine Gael party, Labour were already absolutely supportive of marriage equality, but it put that pressure for a referendum to be called immediately. We are now having a citizens' assembly on repeal the Eighth Amendment, but there is one crucial difference. The Citizens' Convention, which considered a number of other issues where it was more or less effective, nothing nearly as effective as on marriage equality, it has no politicians on it. The Citizens' Convention had 66 citizens, ordinary, so-called ordinary citizens, selected at random, but it also had 33 politicians who went back into the Dáil, the Parliament, and who gave it gravity and sobriety and heft. We will not have that in our Citizens' Assembly, and it is, I think, a great loss. It is very interesting to maybe reflect on that. It's something we might think about later. 5, and I would go really fast. The convention contributed very importantly to creating cross-party consensus, so that even parties that were not, dare I say it, over-enthusiastic or not really enthusiastic at all about same-sex marriage got pulled into that sense of an emerging consensus. And while different parties pursued their own route through the campaign with different degrees of eagerness, vigour, enthusiasm and intensity, it is nonetheless true that there was that general cross-party feeling about it. I mean, in some ways, political parties played a low profile in the campaign. I know our politicians will have other things to say about that, but in fact, trust me, they did. And it was particularly interesting because I think it was very plain that the citizens of Ireland, people in Ireland actually, whether they were citizens or not, were actually saying, this is a grassroots issue. This is a social movement issue. This is something that we, the people who live here, are in charge of. We define and determine what it's about, and it has nothing to do with our party political affiliations. And actually, voter analysis afterwards demonstrates that quite clearly. 6th, there was a compelling message, very clear, but which was pared down to the absolute bone. There was a terrific panel on messaging this morning. We've heard a lot about that today. I won't go on about it. But I just want to say that that degree of simplicity and clarity requires hugely sophisticated understanding, expertise, and skill to produce, to channel, and to maintain message discipline throughout really what was quite a long campaign, to maintain tone and language through multiple media throughout the campaign. So clarity and simplicity and discipline again with messaging. 7, voter mobilization, get the vote out. From, I think, almost the get-go, we were all aware that it was one thing to convince people, it was another thing entirely to get them out there and to vote. And I think while we've talked a great deal and rightly about the social media campaigns and traditional media campaigns, in fact, the ground campaign, the canvassing door-to-door campaign, was immensely important. It didn't necessarily change voters' decision as to which way they were going to vote, but it worked hugely importantly to put them out there, to get them out there to actually go to the polling booth and to bring their families, their friends, their work colleagues, everybody with them. And that door-to-door campaign was unusual in a referendum situation. You tend to find it more in general elections, much less so in Ireland in referendums. And a key learning, certainly for me, is that door-to-door canvassing absolutely pays dividends in this country for campaigning. Next, never underestimate the opposition. As if we would, it's very hard to underestimate your opposition when they're in your face every single minute, everywhere you look. But don't see them either as all-powerful or invincible, because they absolutely are not. And I could do a whole talk on the failures of the no side, in its lapses, its omission, the weak campaign it led. Now, that is not to say that therefore we won easily. We didn't, but they made huge mistakes. One of their huge mistakes was, by the way, that they had absolutely no ground campaign to speak of. But thinking forward to campaigns to come, they know that. They know they ran a bad campaign. They know they ran a weak campaign. And we can bet our bottom euro, or whatever it is we have now, it's not so clear to me, you can bet your bottom euro that, in fact, they are even now aping us, imitating us, planning, appropriating our language. Celebrate the 8th, they say. Equality is the 8th Amendment. Please, really. But that's what they're doing. Keep your eye on the opposition at all times. 9. We learned that the old cleavages in Irish society are absolutely dead and gone. Socio-sexual issues are not nearly the big divide. You don't empty a room in 2 minutes now by saying either lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, marriage, family, or indeed abortion. That doesn't happen. People are much more grown up and sophisticated. And that sophistication actually came out very clearly, I think, in the result. That conservative image of a conservative Catholic Ireland, which we all knew was eroding, is, I think, now finally shattered. There has been a very profound generation shift over the past 2 to 3 generations, over the generations, really, of my lifetime. Finally, money. Just money. Just money. You just need an awful lot of it, as much as you can possibly get, to run a really very good campaign. I didn't start with it, because it's not your motivator, but it is your baseline, and you have to get it by hook or by crook. So watch out, hands in pockets, please, for what's coming down the road. It's now my very great pleasure to introduce our speakers for today, which I'll just pop back up there and do. Thank you.